everybody, and happy halfway to the holidays. I am Brenda KB Anderson, and I am very excited to show you guys today how to make these holiday lights pillows. They're just a cute little accent pillow for your couch or chair to just kind of, it's got a little bit of humor, it's just kind of to have a little bit of holiday cheer, right? So one thing that, you may have noticed, they're quite large. But they really don't take that long to make. They're single crochet, they're really simple. Even if you've never made a three-dimensional thing before, you can do it. I'm gonna lead you through all the steps today. And since we're starting now in the summertime, this will definitely be done by Christmas. So one thing, I'm kind of a procrastinator, so I do appreciate kind of, little gentle reminders here and there from people like, hey, you could start on this now and then you won't have a big holiday crunch right when it comes up to the season, because you probably don't want to be sitting around making cute accent pillows for your couch when you have this long list of things that you want to make for other people, right? So not that you can't give these to other people, but you just might want to keep them for yourself. So this is a good time to start on all those things that you kind of would like to have for the holiday season, but I know for me, as it gets closer and closer to the holidays, I'm like, I guess I don't need to do this thing. I probably shouldn't do that thing because I got to focus on getting these things done for the people that I'm gifting stuff to. So anyway, welcome everybody. Of course, this is a live event. So as I'm going through all the instruction today, please let me know if I need to go over something to be a little bit more clear, or if you have any questions, if you just have any comments, anything you'd like to share, helpful tips for people. If you just want to tell me where you're crocheting from, that would be awesome too. I love to hear from you guys. So, all right, so this project is basically like a giant amigurumi, like a crocheted toy. And I used a chunky yarn so that it would go a little bit quicker. It's called a bulky. It's not a super bulky, it's a bulky. So if you are thinking, I have all this acrylic worsted weight yarn, I really wish you would have designed it in that, you could try making a gauge swatch in your worsted weight yarn doubled and see what size that ends up being. And if you know me, you may know that I always try to get out of doing my gauge swatch, so a lot of times I will choose a part of my project that turns into the gauge swatch, so you can actually start on the project, and that way you actually have something you can use to check your gauge and make sure that you are on track and your project is going to turn out the size that you're anticipating it will. So for this project, it's just this little it's like a little bowl-shaped circular piece that ends up being right here on the end of your light bulb. So if you are thinking about substituting with a different yarn, maybe a different yarn weight, you'll want to do up your gauge swatch and just see what size this is. So of course, if it ends up bigger than that and you like the fabric that it's creating, there aren't a lot of holes between your stitches and it's still pretty dense, then you can just go ahead and make it that size if you don't mind your light bulb being bigger. But that's going to affect how much fiber fill you need. So that's just something to think about. If you wanted to make a smaller version of this, maybe you wanted to make something that's just like a little small accent piece for your bookcase or something else, like a smaller bulb, you could try doing this in like a sock weight yarn or something that's a lot thinner and just see what size that is. So if your piece ends up about half the size of my gauge swatch, then the whole light bulb will end up about half the size as my light bulb. So that's just like a general tool to help you figure out what size this is going to be. Since nobody's going to be wearing this, you don't have to make it a specific size. Nobody's going to say, I don't know about that accent pillow, it's like an inch too short. I mean, I just made this up. So really, it's fine if it's not exactly the same as my gauge, but I just wanted to give you some tips in case you wanted to modify things. All right, so Brenda is saying hello from Louisville, Kentucky. Hello, Brenda. What an awesome name you have. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the material. So like I said, we're using a bulky yarn, also sometimes a chunky yarn. It is a number 5 if you find that on your yarn label. The CYC will have some numbers from 1 up through 7 or so like that. 4 is a worsted weight, so this is just a little bit bigger than a worsted weight yarn, a little bit thicker. So we're going to need 2 skeins of the bulb color, like this part, and then 1 skein of this if you're using the same thing that I used. And if you're interested in exactly what I used, all that information is in your free pattern download. So definitely download that. You can check it out. And you can also follow along with what I'm going to be talking you through, because I'm going to be working from my pattern here. All right, so you'll need, of course, the yarn, and then you're going to need a hook to go with that. I'm using an eye, which is a 5.5 millimeter hook, but you will use whatever hook that you need to in order to get a nice firm gauge. You can see here, you can't really see holes between my stitches unless I really pull them apart and pull them up above the table. Maybe you can kind of see holes, but you want it to be a very stiff fabric, so that way when you put stuffing behind it and it kind of stretches a little, you still don't see the stuffing poking through. I mean, if you see a little tiny pinpricks of it, that's fine, but you just don't want to have, it just looks a lot neater and tidier if it's much more sturdy and it doesn't get stretched out when you put that stuffing in there. So you can, go down a hook size if your fabric feels like it might be too loose, or if it's like really hard to work it up, you could go up a hook size to make it a little bit bigger. All right. The other thing, of course, that you're going to need is the filling inside these, and what I'm using is a polyester fiber fill. You will not need this gigantic bag. This is a 32-ounce bag. I think we'll need a little more than half of that, though. We'll see as we stuff the project later exactly how much I use. But I think, let me see, did I note that? Let's see. Oh, fiber fill. Yeah, I think it was somewhere between 16 ounces and 32 ounces is what I use. But that will kind of, I've noticed that some fiber fill is heavier or lighter than others, just depending on how it's made. So that weight might not really mean a whole lot, just kind of enough to give you a little bit of an idea when you're shopping for your materials. And of course, you're going to need a yarn needle to weave in those tails and some stitch markers. And I would recommend using some stitch markers in various colors. At least one of them should be different from the other three. So that way we can keep track of the beginning of our rounds, and then we can keep track of some other points as we work our way around, because we're going to be working this project mostly in the round here. All right, so let's get started making the little, this is how to make the tip. Let's see, let me see what I labeled it as. Silver tip is what I call it in the pattern, which is right here. And we're using the contrasting color, which is, in my project, it's the gray. This is the piece we're going to be making. It is not a totally flat circle. It's a little bit more of like a shallow bowl shape. And we are going to begin by making an adjustable loop and then working into that loop. So there's lots of different ways to make an adjustable loop. The way that I like to teach it, which I feel like is pretty straightforward, is to just draw yourself a little loop. So here's the ball of yarn is connected to this side. That's our cut end. And then we take the loop and flip it over onto the strand that is connected to the ball, like this. And then we'll slide our hook underneath that middle strand right there. And you can pull that a little bit tight, but not all the way. And then we're gonna chain one just to kind of anchor our yarn to our loop, our adjustable loop. And then you can just crochet. I like to crochet around this way, but if you want to crochet around the overlapping two strands of yarn, then all you need to do is twist your loop and just begin crocheting in that direction. I usually just leave it this way because it's easier for me. And then when I weave in my ends, I weave it in nice and tight so that the loop can't open itself up. All right, so now we're going to be working our single crochets. We're going to do 6 single crochets right into the center. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's our 6 single crochets, and then we are going to begin working some increases here. So we're going to put 2 increases into the first stitch. 1 and 2. And we're going to mark that first stitch so that we don't lose it. I always like to mark the first stitch of my round with something that's either red or pink or something similar, because to me that color means stop, as in you're stopping at the beginning or after you've completed your round. That's like sort of a stopping point. All right, so we're going to continue working 2 single crochets into each of those stitches around, and we'll end up with 12 single crochets around. So and now I just realized I may not have just explained how to do single crochet for those of you who are newer to crochet. So you'll insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Let's do that one more time. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, we have 2 more stitches to work into. There's 1 and 2 in that stitch, and 1 and 2 in this stitch. All right, so now we have 12 single crochets around, and on the next round we're going to do 2 single crochets into the next stitch and 1 single crochet into the following stitch, and then we're going to repeat that. And before I start that, I just want to show you, for those of you who are newer to crochet or newer to reading patterns, I want to explain what is going on here in this pattern. So when you look at round 3, that's the round we're working on. So this says round 3, and then in brackets it says 2 single crochets into the next stitch, 1 single crochet into the next stitch. So what that, and then that's within the brackets, and then outside of the brackets it says 6 times. So what it's telling you is everything that's inside those brackets, that's what you repeat 6 times in a row. So I'll do that now, and that will help you, because I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to skip a little further along just so we have time to complete this project within our hour here. But I just wanted to explain that to those of you who are newer to crochet, kind of what you're looking at here. So what's in the brackets, you work through that, and then you repeat that. So you'll work through here, and you'll do that 6 times to get to the end of the round. And then over here it says 18 single crochet. What that means is it's just telling you how many you have at the end of your round. It's just kind of like a little checkpoint so that you know where you're at. Let's see. Brat's mom says, "Hi Brenda, I have all your classes and lots of your DVDs and books." Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you're here. And LB says, "How much would you sell these for?" Oh, that is a question I feel like I can't really answer. I don't normally sell my handmade goods because I don't really enjoy the business end of things and determining how much it's worth and then going to a market. That's just not, or even on Etsy, that's just not something that I feel like I'm very good at. But you should think about think about a price where you would feel good about it if it's sold for that price. That's like my best advice to you, because I don't, the worst thing is if you sell something and people are buying it like crazy because you priced it low enough, but then they go and you think, wow, I spent a lot of time on that, and they don't even realize. So, you may be able to look up some things that are similar, like throw pillows on Etsy or other places too, just to get some ideas. All right. So let me get back to this. And then Brenda popped in here again and said, "I'm an amazing instructor." Oh, thank you so much. That's very, very sweet. All right. Okay. And she likes how she can minimize the chat and she can zoom in. Awesome. So you can see the details a little better. Okay. So we're about to be working round 3, and I just explained what this means, what the brackets mean, and we're going to be working this so that you guys can see what that looks like. So we're going to do 2 single crochets into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and then 1 single crochet into the following stitch. There we go. Now we're going to repeat what we just did. That was just those 3 stitches. So 2 into one stitch, 1 into the next stitch, and we're going to repeat that 5 more times around. So 2 into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and 1 into the following stitch. 2 into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and 1 into the following stitch. 2 into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and 1 into the following stitch. 2 into the next stitch, and 1 into the following stitch. And here's our last repeat. There's 2 into the next stitch and 1 to the following stitch. All right, so now we have 18 single crochets. So you're going to keep working around and around, and you may have noticed we're not doing a join. If you don't know what a join is, that's okay. Sometimes when you work in the round, you'll do a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round, and then you do a chain 1 to kind of get your hook up to the level of the next round, and you'll continue working. But for most of my amigurumi type toys and things like that, I just continue working around in the spiral because I don't like to see that little you see like a little horizontal bar every time you join, and that just kind of bothers me. But if you prefer it that way, then absolutely you can join at the end of your rounds. It's not going to hurt anything. I just don't usually do that. I just work in a spiral. Okay, so we've worked through round 3 here, and then we're going to continue working what's in those parentheses 6 times here on the next round. So you'll single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches this time, and then 2 single crochets into the next stitch, and then you repeat that over and over. So you'll work a total of 6 times around, and you'll end up with 24 single crochets. So you're going to lead your way. Here we only end up with 4 increases on round 5. Every line is going to tell you, how many times to work what's in that bracket, and you'll work what's in that bracket, repeating that however many times it says on the outside there. So you can double check your stitches here. So at the end of working round 8, you're going to have a piece again that looks like this. It's just like a very shallow kind of curved bowl shape. And then you can do a slip stitch and you'll fasten off, and you're going to leave a long yarn tail. So we're just going to slip stitch here, and we'll just pull that yarn through, and we're going to leave ourselves a nice long yarn tail. I mean, you'll have to cut your yarn. I was running out of yarn, so that just worked out for me, but you'll have to cut your yarn, and you want to give yourself, I don't know, maybe like a yard or so, maybe even a little bit less. All you're going to be doing with this long yarn tail is you're going to be sewing around the edge of this when we get other pieces made. So however long you think you need to make your yarn tail in order to do that. And then you're going to set that piece aside. Well, actually, after you measure it. So when you measure it for your gauge, to check your gauge, you're going to be measuring kind of over this hill like this. You'll be taking from one edge, measuring up over the mound and over to the other side, and then you're going to compare that to my measurement. And that, unless you just like the fabric and you are fine with whatever size it ends up turning out like, which is completely fine. This, like I said, we're not going to be wearing this. Okay, so if you worked through round 14, that would be, here's the second gauge swatch. So this would be if you're just measuring single crochet worked in the round. This is sort of more of a traditional gauge swatch, but here's my cheater gauge, what I was talking about. You'll follow your directions through round 7, then you're going to measure it, and it's 4.25 inches measured over the top curve of that dome. So you're going to stop at round 7. I think I might have round 8 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, I've already worked through round 8. But just imagine there's one less round here, and then you would just put this at the edge and measure it up over the top, and it would be that 4.25 inches. Just make sure your measuring tape hits that center line before it comes back down. All right, and then you'll do that. You'll finish it up with round 8. If you like your gauge, how your gauge is turning out, you'll finish it up with round 8 and then fasten off. All right, now we're going to move on to the threaded section. And what we're going to be working on is this. So all these cool little grooves are really just tucks in the fabric, and you don't have to sew them or anything. We're going to be working them with a round of crochet, and it might look very complicated and very strange, but it's really not as complicated as it seems. So I will show you how to do that. So the first thing is you're going to chain 41 stitches. Let's see, I'm just checking to see if we have any more questions. Looks like I'm all caught up. So we're going to start with 41 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. So we start with a chain that looks like about like this. And then we are going to begin by working into each one of these chains, but I like to work into the bottom of the chain. So if you look at the V's, they're all stacked up here on the top of the chain, and we roll it over, and then you see all these little horizontal dashes on the back side or the bottom. That's where I want to be working through. So I'm going to skip the very first dash, which is right here, and I'm going to work a single crochet into the next dash. So insert, yarn over, pull up loop, yarn over, pull through 2. There's our very first stitch. And if you're newer to crochet, I would recommend just putting a stitch marker into that stitch you just made, just so you don't get confused later. And then you're going to just continue working those single crochets into that back bump all the way across. Okay, so insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, so you're just going to continue all the way across, and your piece will look like this. Of course, I did have a stitch marker here, so that might have been confusing. So that's where our very first stitch of the row was in the yellow marker, and then we've worked across, and this is where we've ended. So when you get to that point, then we are going to bring this side of the very first stitch of the round, we're going to bring it right up next to the last stitch we worked. Okay, so we're not, after we finished, we're not turning or anything, we're still looking at the stitches we just made, our hook's in the same place, and we're just taking the end and we're going to place it right next to where we just ended up. And so this is what's going to begin the circle. We're going to start working in the round at this point. So I'm going to remove this stitch marker because that was marking the very first stitch that I did. And we're going to start by working a single crochet into the front loop of each stitch across. So the front loop is just this loop right here in the front. Normally we put our crochet hook under both loops like this, but we're just going to be working underneath this front loop here, leaving that back loop free. So we'll insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And we're going to continue working single crochets into that front loop all the way around here. The reason that we're doing this is because we're trying to keep a row full of loops, unworked loops, that we can work into later. So that's we're just sort of saving that back loop for another purpose later on down the road. And that's going to help us make those tucks that create the grooves in our in the light bulb. And I had actually thought that it would be really fun to make this part out of a metallic yarn, although it was kind of hard I wanted to use a yarn that, it was easily accessible, and I had some trouble finding a bulky yarn in metallic, but if you were substituting with worsted weight anyway, you could do 2 strands of a worsted weight metallic here, or maybe you'll have better luck finding the right kind of bulky yarn that's in a metallic. But I just thought that would be a really fun choice for the bottom of this light bulb, make it a little bit glittery, it'd be kind of fun. A little extra holiday pizzazz. All right, we have almost reached the end of our round here. Okay, it looks like, somebody has a question. I'm an accomplished crocheter, but I'm awful at sewing into the back bumps. Can I just do it regular? Will not look good. Yeah, you don't have to work into the back bumps. I feel like it makes it a little bit more sturdy when you do that seam. It's not going to look bad though. You can just, and in fact, the only reason I worked that one row instead of just joining and then working in the round in a spiral from the very start, from the very first chain, is just to leave those 2 loops free, because I think that it looks a little bit tidier and it's a little easier to sew your pieces together. But if you are like, yep, that's not for me, I just want to work into it in the regular way, that is completely fine. You can just do your chain and then you can just start working your first round into the the normal placement of your stitches underneath the top 2 loops. You don't have to do a row and then join to work on the round. You can just, bring your 2 ends of your chain together and then just start crocheting around for that first, it will be a round instead of a row, instead of the setup row. Alrighty, so here, whoops, I split my yarn a little there. Okay, here is my last stitch, working into that front loop as we did all the way around, and I want to show you what that looks like on the back side. So you can see all these little dashes, all these little lines that make a horizontal ridge around. We're going to be working into those later on. Not on this round, but later on. Okay, so after this point, we are going to work 3 rounds of just single crochet, just straight up single crochet in 3 rounds. So this time we're working underneath both loops like this. And I'm going to mark that stitch because otherwise I'm going to start getting confused as to where the beginning of my rounds is. I'll use a pink one. So there's the first stitch, and we're just going to continue working around into each stitch as they come up. And so after you do that, you're going to end up with a piece that looks like this. Okay, so once again, we'll look back on the inside. There's that ridge that we left open, but now it's further down because we've worked 3 more rounds on top of that. So you can, if you kind of pull it up, this was the round right here where we worked into just the front loop, and then we had 1, 2, 3 more rounds of single crochet that we've already worked. Okay, so now is the exciting part. Get ready for the tucks we're going to make. All right, so on the first stitch of this next round, this round is, let's see, round number 5. We're going to work 1 single crochet in the next stitch. And then this whole paragraph is basically all just kind of explaining why we're doing that, because this has confused a lot of people when I've used this in the past. As you crochet and single crochet, every time you make a stitch and you're working in the round, your rounds start sort of drifting off to the side. So what we're going to be doing in this round is we are going to attach this stitch to the loop that's way down below here, but because we've kept working in a spiral, we've sort of shifted off over to the side. So I want to line up my loop with the stitch, the very first stitch. So I'm going to do that by just making a single crochet here and then pretending I didn't do that. So, okay, I made a single crochet, and now I'm going to start the beginning of my round. So if you had a stitch marker in that stitch, you would take it out, make the stitch, and then the very next stitch that you make is going to count as the first stitch of your round. It's basically just a reset. All right, so we made 1 single crochet just like normal. Now the next stitch is what I abbreviated as SC with a little lowercase t, so single crochet tuck. This is a thing that I made up, so you probably won't be able to find that if you just Google it. But what it means is you're going to insert your hook underneath these 2 stitches, or sorry, the 2 loops of that next stitch, okay? So just through that stitch like you normally do. Then you are going to insert your hook down below into that first unused loop, or unused leftover loop there. Then we're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull that loop through both of those stitches like this, and we'll yarn over and pull through 2 to complete our single crochet. And this gets easier as you go around, I promise, because that seems kind of weird, but it's going to start bringing those 2 pieces together so you don't have to worry too much about how to line things up. All right, so the next stitch, we're going to insert our hook underneath both loops just like normal, and then we find the stitch below the leftover loop that we hadn't worked through, and we just insert our hook. We're going from top to bottom through that leftover loop, and then we're going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and yarn over and pull through 2. Okay, so what that's doing here is it's pinching that together. We're basically folding this and crocheting into it, so we get that ridge sticking out. So we're just going to continue working through the stitch in front just like normal, and then sliding our hook through that unused loop from the round below where we left that loop open. So you can see as you work around, you can just kind of pinch this, fold it flat, bring your two layers together, and then it's not so hard. It's almost like doing just a regular stitch. It's really not, it's not as tricky as you might think. So we'll work our way around, and that was our first tuck. So, when you're working on this part does take a little bit longer than you would think because you're making a lot of rounds. And some of those rounds, every once in a while, you'll be like, oh, wow, I'm really coming along here. And then you got to do a tuck, and then it gets shorter, which is a little bit discouraging. But if you know that that's going to happen before you start it, and also once you start seeing those cool ridges popping out, it'll be, you'll feel better about it, I promise. All right. We have just a little bit left. And, at this point, you've learned most of the skills you actually need for this entire pillow. I just want to show you some decreases later, and that's really all that's left, besides the seaming and the stuffing. I know it seems crazy because we haven't really made that much so far, but the rest of this is pretty straightforward. It's just mostly this kind of tuck thing that I for sure wanted to demonstrate because it's kind of a strange technique. All right, looks like we have 2 more stitches left. There's our last stitch and our last unused loop. All right, so now we have this little piece and this ridge sticking out. And then we're going to continue with single crochets. We're going to do 2 rounds of single crochets. We're not increasing, we're just placing 1 single crochet into each stitch around. That's all we're doing here. All right. Oh, and I want to remind you guys, you can enter to win a Stella 2 light. You can see that there's a link in the chat, so you guys should check that out. All right, looks like we are about halfway around here. And so you can see, I think that's enough so that you can see what's happening. So see how this flange is just kind of sticking out. So we've worked here, we made this tuck, and now we're working, this round that's going to stick straight up. So as we continue on with this, you would do 1 more round of regular single crochet. So after you complete this round, you do 1 more round of single crochet, and then you're going to do a round of working just through those front loops. Okay, so I already showed you how to do that. That was in round 1, so that was right after the setup row. In round 1, we worked just through those front loops, leaving the back loop open. And then after you do a round of just working in the front, then you do 3 more rounds of just regular single crochet, and then you do 1 round of the single crochet tuck to make another tuck in it. So you're just going to continue working the things that I already showed you how to do until you have 4 ridges. So it'll look like this. You'll have 4 ridges, and you'll have finished, if you do a complete repeat, all the way up to round, round 28. So you'll be repeating, the last 2 rounds you'll be repeating are repeats of round 13 and 14, where you're just doing single crochet in each stitch around. That's what you're going to finish with. So what I'm trying to tell you is there's 2 rounds of just working in single crochet after you do that last tuck round. And then we are going to do 1 round of just slip stitching into each stitch around. So try not to make your slip stitches too tight because you don't want to constrict it. That is what some people have a tendency, many people I should say, have a tendency to make their slip stitches really tight. Just kind of keep an eye on that as you're moving around. You don't want to make that too tight because it'll get a little bit harder to work into. Even though you're not working into your slip stitches on the next round, I'll explain that in a minute. It still could make it a little bit trickier to work that next round. So we're just doing a slip stitch, so you just insert your hook, grab that yarn, pull up a loop, and pull through the loop on your hook, just like that. And Valerie is saying she is from Wheaton, Illinois, and she learned a new stitch. Yay! Yeah, this tuck stitch, I mean, maybe other people have been doing this, but this is just something that kind of came from my mind because I wanted to make these grooves to make it look a little bit more like a light bulb. So I don't think there's an official real name for this stitch because I made it up, but there could be. Somebody else might have already done this too. That's the thing with crochet, is a lot of times when you make up a new thing, then you start checking around and you're like, oh, I guess this already existed. That happens a lot. All right, so again, I'm just working a slip stitch in each stitch around. And the reason that we're doing this is because the next round I'm going to work with the new color. And this slip stitch really makes a very crisp, definite line between one color and the next color. I use this a lot in my amigurumi toys, like if I'm making a squirrel with a pair of pants and I want it to look like the pants are sitting on top of the squirrel body, I will do a round, if I started on the pants, I will do a round of slip stitches in the pants color before I switch to the body color. That's just something that helps make your, you'll just see in a minute when I start working, but it helps make your stitches look a little bit tidier when you start working that next round of color, of a different color. All right, so I've worked my last slip stitch, and then we're just gonna cut off our yarn. It just needs to be long enough to weave in your tails later, and then you can just fasten off and pull through. And then, if you can see here, let's see. So here is my slip stitch. That's the very first slip stitch that I did. And if you look behind that, you can still see the 2 loops of the stitch that I worked that into right there. So that's where we're going to begin our next color, right behind that. But honestly, you could pick up any of these stitches around here. It doesn't matter if you pick it up right here. You can, don't stress out, oh, is this really the first one, or is this the first one? Is this the first? I don't know where the first one is. As long as you have the right amount of stitches when you go around and you're working into the last round of single crochet and not your slip stitches, then you're good. So let me grab my new color and show you how to do this. All right, so here is the first stitch. Now we're just pulling, that slip stitch is sitting right on the top surface. I'm just pulling that towards myself so I can access that slip stitch that's kind of behind it. So my hook is really going above the slip stitch, but underneath the 2 loops from the stitch that I worked in the previous round of actual single crochet, right? So we're gonna just yarn over, pull up a loop, and then I'm gonna chain 1 just to kind of anchor it. That doesn't count as anything. And I'm just doing that to kind of anchor my yarn. And then I'm going to begin with the very same stitch, and I'm going to work a single crochet into that stitch. And then I'm going to continue working single crochets into each of these stitches around, making sure that I am inserting my hook behind, or above. I'm not catching that slip stitch round, is what I'm trying to say. I'm just working into the single crochet stitches from that last round of single crochets. Okay, so you can see now there's a pretty distinct line that's forming between the 2 colors, and it's nice because we made that slip stitch round, so it looks like this gray piece is sitting on top of the yellow right there. There's a nice little edge, a little bit of a ridge, and it's just very straight across. So that's just one little detail that I like to add to my amigurumi whenever I'm making a color change, and I want that color change to look very distinct, like somebody's wearing a pair of mittens and the edge of the mitten is sitting on top of the body, or they're wearing a shirt and the bottom of the shirt is sitting on top of the furry body of the animal or something. Anytime you want to see that very distinct color change, you can do a round of slip stitches. And you could, if you wanted the yellow, say you were working this light bulb and you wanted it to look like the yellow was sitting on top of the gray for some reason, like you're working, maybe it's for a different project, then you could do a slip stitch round in yellow first before continuing with the yellow, instead of doing your slip stitch round in the gray. And then it would look like the yellow is sitting on top of the gray. So whatever color you want it, as you're working on these kind of projects, whatever color you want it to look like is sitting on top, that's the color that you're going to do your slip stitch round in. And it's just that decorative slip stitch round. You're not ever going to work into those slip stitches. You're just going to sit there on the top surface of your work. All right, so I'm going to count up my stitches here just to make sure I have 40 and I didn't miss any. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, I have one more stitch to do, and there it is. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to see that last stitch, so that is why I had to count that up. Now we've got 40. So we don't need a join or anything. And I like to leave this beginning yarn tail hanging on the outside to remind myself I can use that to stitch up this hole, and I can even do it with the front of my work facing, because there's going to be a tiny little hole once I start working in a spiral. But I just prefer to do it this way instead of doing a join. You could also, you could do a join here if you wanted to. Up to you. But the way I like to do this is I just like to let this color hang on the front. I just pull it out, and then I just continue my merry way around. So on the next round, we're going to start our increases. So we have to increase to make the bulb kind of flare out and make a nice bulb shape here. So I'm going to begin by putting 2 stitches into, let's see, I think it's 1 stitch, and then the last stitch of the repeat is 2. Let me just double check. Here we are. Round 2. Okay, single crochet into each of the next 9 stitches, 2 single crochets into the next stitch, and we're going to repeat that series 4 times. And then we're going to be putting a stitch marker into the first stitch of each repeat as we do this. So here's our first stitch. I'm going to put a pink stitch marker in the beginning. stitch. That's the very first stitch of the round. Now we're going to do 8 more for a total of 9 stitches so far. All right, that should be 9. 1, 2, 3, 6, and 9. And then we're going to do 2 stitches in the following stitch, 1 and 2. So that is the end of our repeat. So we're going to do what we just did 3 more times around. So we're going to work 9 single crochet, and in the first single crochet I am going to put a stitch marker. And remember which stitch marker is the beginning of your rounds, but also if you pull that yarn tail out, that will tell you where the beginning of your round is too, just in case you forgot. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we're going to do 2 single crochets into the next stitch, 1 and 2. That's the end of the second repeat. Here is our third repeat. I'm going to place a stitch marker there. Six, 7, 8, 9. And then we'll do 2 single crochets here, and then we have 1 more repeat of that. 1. Place my stitch marker. So there should be a total of 4 stitch markers after you've completed this round. And the stitch markers are there so that you don't have to keep counting. I like to try and make my patterns so that you can watch TV or do other things while you're working on parts of the pattern. I try to make that happen if at all possible. So I like to add stitch markers to things to help you keep track of where you're at, so you don't have to count as much. All right, so now we have 4 equal sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as we work rounds 3 through 9, we are going to be making an increase between each set of markers. So we're just single crocheting around and making an increase between each set of markers. So I already showed you how to do an increase. An increase, that just means you're putting 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. So it does not matter where you put your increases, but as you go around and around and around, you want to kind of move around where you're putting the increases. So what I like to do is I like to just say to myself, okay, on this round, I'm going to put my increases within, maybe at the halfway point between each set of increases. So as I go around, I'll single crochet across till I get to about the halfway point, then I'll do 2 single crochets into that stitch. Single crochet, replace the marker, single crochet, and then here I am at the halfway point, I'll do 2 single crochets into that stitch. Same thing, going around, 2 single crochets there, and 2 single crochets there. Then on the next round, I'll say to myself, okay, this time I'm going to put my increase really close to the beginning of the round. So I'll do like 1 stitch or 2, and then I'll do my increase. Okay, so then I'll do that here, and the same thing here, 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 as I'm working around. Then on the following round, I'll say, okay, I'm going to put it towards the end this time. Here, 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 here. And you can start to see where, when you get a little bit more used to crocheting and what things look like, you will be able to pick out those increases. You can see there's 2 little V's here pointing into the same hole. That means those 2 stitches were worked into that same stitch. So you might be able to just recognize your increases and just avoid putting your increases into another increase. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you keep stacking up your increases, which you can certainly do if you're like, yeah, Brenda, I just disagree with you. I like to have all my increases in the same spot. That's completely fine. The only reason that I choose not to do that is because I like to place them randomly so that they don't, to me, it's a little less distracting. If you put them in exactly the same place every time, it will make kind of a straight line, but because we're single crocheting in the round, they will start to veer off to the side. I think if it were like knitting, where your increases will just line up and stack right on top of each other, I would probably opt for this project to just have them on top of each other. But that's not the case. You could also just accommodate for that and make sure they're actually lining up and doing those 4 increases. You can do that, but it all just started to seem too fiddly to me, and I wanted to just keep this really beginner friendly. So I I just am instructing you to just place your increase wherever you want to between these two, but try to avoid putting an increase in the top of another increase from the previous round. Okay, so now you're going to continue following the directions here. So for rounds, let's see, 3 through 9, you're going to be making 4 increases per round. So just like I was describing in between all of those. Then when you get to round 10, I instruct you to take out the second and the fourth markers. So remember, our pink was our beginning. So we'll take out the second marker, which would be here. We'd be a lot further along in our project, by the way. This wouldn't be happening yet. And then we would take out our fourth marker, which would be here. So what we're left with is just two equal sections. And then we're going to continue making increases in those 2 sections. So you have a bigger place, to decide where you're going to put your increase. So, move maybe on one round, you'll put it here. On another round, when you go around, you'll put it here. Just kind of shift around where you put those. And you're going to continue on for 4 rounds, just making 2 increases per round. So 1 on this side and 1 on this side. Then after you've completed that, you are going to do 6 rounds of just working even. So that just means you're going to single crochet into each stitch around. Let me pull out my sample so you can actually see what this starts looking like. I don't have time to do all these rounds, but I think that just showing you how to do your increases and what the stitch markers are for, I think that'll clear up anything in the pattern here. So we did our 4 increases per round, which increases it pretty sharply here, and then we increase a little bit less here. You can see how it's flaring out a little more here, a little less here. Then there's a section in the middle where we're just going around and around and around for six rounds. And then we're going to start doing decreases. So when we do the decreases, which I will show you how to do in a minute, we're working rounds 20 to 43. That's a lot of rounds. And we're going to make 2 decreases per round. So you're still going to have 2 markers, your beginning marker and then your halfway point marker. And then you're going to do a decrease on one side and a decrease on the other. And the rules are pretty much the same. Like, I'd like you to not put your decrease in another decrease. So when you're going around, maybe you'll think, okay, I'll put mine pretty close to the marker. I'll just do a couple stitches, put a decrease here. I'll do, and then, single crochet around, a couple of stitches, a decrease here. Then maybe on your next round, you'll put your decrease over here and over here, or over here and over here. Just kind of, I just like to think about them as being mostly opposite the circle from each other and just placing them in a different place. And if you get confused, like, oh, where did I put that decrease? It doesn't matter as long as you're not putting, too many decreases on top of each other, because then that's going to start being kind of obvious where all your decreases are. So this is the shape that it starts to make after you have worked rounds 20 to 43. And I know I have not talked about the decreases yet, but I'm going to show you how to do them in the next round. So just know the decreases I'm about to show you, those are the same decreases you're going to be doing in rounds 20 to 43. It's just a single crochet 2 together, but I like to do an invisible decrease. And there are different ways to do that. I'll show you the way that I like to do that. But just so you know, we are going to be working on round number 44. That's where we're at here along on our project. But the decreases I'm about to do, they apply to these types of decreases that happened in rounds 20 to 43. Alrighty. Okay, so we're going to make a single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. So that's right here. Oh, and I forgot, I can remove this extra marker now. We're going to only be using the beginning marker from now on. We're going to be closing this up. All right, so we're going to single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. So here's 1. We'll place that marker. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we single crochet 2 together. So this is the decrease that I'm talking about. So for my decreases, when I do an invisible decrease, I like to insert my hook under just the front loop of the next stitch. And then I just go right ahead and insert my hook underneath both loops of the following stitch. Okay, so there's really 3 loops on my hook there. Then I yarn over and I pull my hook through both of those stitches, 1 and 2, and then I complete a single crochet as normal. So I yarn over and pull through 2. And I'll show you that a few more times so you can see. So now we're going to make our next repeat of working 6 single crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's our decrease. So I slide it underneath that front loop of the next stitch and under both loops of the following stitch. Yarn over and pull through all those loops. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2. That's my next decrease. So I'm doing the repeat again one more time. Well, actually, more than one more time. But right now I'm repeating what I already showed you. I think I'm at 4 stitches. Let's see. So here's my decrease. Just if you're looking for where your decreases are, you can look at the stitches just below them. So you will see when you're working one stitch into the next stitch, your new stitch is just ever so slightly off to the right, or if you're a left-handed stitcher, off to the left of the stitch that from the previous round. So here's one. You know, these are stacked up pretty much on top of each other, just slightly at an angle. And here's one. The next one is over here, but yet there's a stitch here. So that means we decreased by making these 2 stitches come together into one stitch. So there's our decrease right there. All right, you don't have to know what that looks like, but the more you crochet, you know, it just helps to really look at what your stitches are doing as you're making these stitches so that you can recognize them later. If you're like, oh, how many stitches did I do since my decrease? I don't remember. So here's my decrease, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do one more, and then another decrease. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's our decrease right here. There we go. All right, so now I can't remember if I told you we were doing that 6 times around. We were only doing that 4 times around. I'm not sure if I told you that or if I told you 6 times, but we were single crocheting into each of the next 6 stitches, single crochet 2 together, and we did that a total of 4 times in round 44, okay? So round 45, we're going to single crochet into the next 2 stitches, then we're going to make a decrease, then we're going to single crochet into 3 stitches. So here's the first one and the second one. We'll replace our loop, or replace our stitch marker. Then we're going to do a decrease right there. Then we're going to do 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, each into their own stitch there. And then we're going to repeat that. So 1 and 2, and then a decrease, and then 1, 2, 3. All right, we'll do that 2 more times. 1 and 2, a decrease, and then 1, 2, and 3. One more time. 1 and 2, decrease, 1 and 2, and 3. We have a comment from C Wolfpack 3. They're saying from the photo in the ad for the holiday projects, I didn't realize this pillow would be so large. It's like a huge amigurumi. Yes, it is huge. It's very big. I wanted it to be like, you know, if you put it on your couch, it would actually do something and, you know, could prop you up. You know, you could lean on it a little bit. I just, yeah, they're large. And then they have a question. Brenda, what is better about doing the invisible decrease this way, please? I thought it was supposed to be front loop for both. I don't, you know, it may not be better for everybody. I prefer doing my invisible decrease with the yarn or with the hook going through both of the loops of the second stitch because it feels more sturdy and it kind of pulls the stitch a little tighter to me. When I do, most of the times when you see an invisible decrease, people will put their hook underneath the front loop of each of the next 2 stitches and then they'll complete that, which is fine. But for me, it's kind of stretches out that, it seems a little bit more stretched out here. You can kind of see like there's a little tiny hole there. And maybe it just depends on how you crochet, but I would, you know, you could definitely try it both ways and just see what you think. When I do go under the front stitch, it kind of goes over to, it's pulled over to that second stitch because I'm working under both loops and nothing can get stretched out in that second loop because I'm going underneath both those loops. So for me, it just feels a little tighter and for me tidier, but everybody crochets differently, and you may find it difficult to slide your hook underneath both those loops after going through that front loop. So, you know, this is just one of those things where, you know, it's good to know how other people do it, and then you get to choose whatever makes the most sense to you or whatever works best for you. So there's lots of ways to do things in crochet. That was a good question. All right, so now we are at round 46. We're going to single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches and then single crochet 2 together. So here we'll work 1 and 2, and we're going to replace our stitch marker in that first stitch. And then we will single crochet 2 together, making that decrease here. And then we're going to do that again. So this we are repeating 6 times around. So here's our second repeat. That's bringing in our fabric just a little faster. We're decreasing a little bit quicker here, with 6 decreases in this round instead of 4. Okay, I think we have maybe 1 or 2 repeats left here. And 1 more. Single crochet, single crochet, single crochet 2 together. All right, and then the next round, which is round 47, the last round here, we're just going to make a decrease and then a single crochet into the following stitch. So here's our decrease. We'll replace our marker and then a single crochet into the following stitch. Decrease and single crochet. Decrease, single crochet, decrease, and single crochet. We are almost around to the end here. Here's our last repeat where we do a decrease and then a single crochet. All right, so then we can just cut our yarn, leave yourself a, you know, half a yard or so, maybe even a little less. You don't really need that much, 12 inches or so. And then you can slip stitch into the next stitch, or you could really just fasten off at this point. I oftentimes will just slip stitch to kind of bring that working loop down a little bit lower and pull that through. And then you can close up this hole in the top. And you may be wondering, like, okay, Brenda, why didn't you just decrease 1 more round? Why, now we have all these, like it's kind of a large hole. Why didn't you just keep going? Well, I did that on the first bulb that I made, and it looked kind of pointed, and I didn't like that, and I wanted the very tip of it to be round, a little bit more rounded, so I left it as this sort of larger hole, and then I just gathered it up with my needle. But if you are like, yeah, I don't think so, you could do 1 more round where you just do single crochet 2 together all the way around, and you'll end up with 6 stitches. All right, so I'm going to run my needle through just the front loop of each of these stitches, all the way around, just putting it through the front loop. And you could, if you wanted to, go underneath both loops. You could do that. This just helps me to make it look nice and even, and it pulls through really easily. So especially if I'm using a sturdy acrylic like this, I'll just run it through just that front loop, and it seems to be just fine. It's just a little easier for me to do. All right, so we've made it all the way around, and we are just going to pull on that, and that pulls that hole closed, and then we will weave in our ends. And you might think, why would we weave in our ends? Can't we just tuck it in there? But the way that we closed it, it could open up, and we don't want that. So I'm going to weave in my ends kind of in one direction around this circle where I already sent my loops, or already sent my yarn through. I just kind of go through, and then I'm going to maybe run my stitch or run my needle in the next round down. You can do this however you like, and in fact, you may, especially if you're a newer crocheter, you may find it easier just to poke your needle through to the inside and weave it in there. That would be fine too. I just did not feel like turning this because it's going to be a little bit tricky to get everything through this smaller hole. So I'm just weaving it in on the outside here, with the outside showing. All right, and then when you're happy with that and you've switched it up, you know, to a couple of different directions, at least, I would go at least 3 different directions, meaning turning your needle, going 3 different ways, because that'll confuse your yarn and it'll never be able to find its way out, right? And then we're just gonna cut that off. All right, so now we can stuff this, and then we just add the little silver tip that we crocheted at the very beginning. All right, so I'm gonna start grabbing this filling here, and there are lots of different theories to how to stuff your project. I've seen people say, oh, never put a fistful of stuffing in, you know, only use like tiny little amounts at a time. And I think that makes it very, very smooth, but it also takes a very long time. And I mean, let's be honest, I don't have patience for that, but maybe you do, so that might be a way to go. Just use teeny little pieces at a time to make it really smooth. But what I do is I grab a fistful and I put it in there, and then when I put my hand to the inside, I do this little squiggling with my fingers, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mix. Let me show you on the outside of this. Say I have this inside and I stuff this in there. When I push it in, I push my fingers into the previous blob and I just kind of mix it around like that so that they attach to each other. So it isn't like 2 fully formed blobs sitting next to each other, which causes lumpiness because they just don't intermingle, they don't mix really. See how they just come right apart? But if you put your hand in there and you mix it up like this, then it becomes one blob like that. See, it doesn't come apart. So that's what I'm secretly doing inside here. I know you guys can't see, but I'm just kind of wiggling my fingers and trying to really shape it as best as I can. You do actually have to shape things to make them look nice and smooth. You have to push the stuffing into the places you want it to go. If there's a dip in your light bulb, that's going to be a little strange, so you need to fill that in with your fiber fill and just be looking at how everything is shaped. You know, before you get the whole thing filled up, make sure that you are stuffing it firmly enough down into the tip. So this is a problem I had with the first light bulb that I did. I thought, I'll just keep adding it, and then I'll just add it until the whole thing is very firmly stuffed. But it seemed like it didn't all really want to go down into the tip. So you have to kind of stop and stuff, make sure that this is stuffed as firmly as you want it to be before you move on to the next section. Make sure you wiggle your fingers to attach your fiber fill to the previous blob of fiber fill, and that helps it make things a little bit more smooth. It's kind of surprising how much stuffing you really need for these. But you know, you may want to, you know, if you stuff them lightly, it is probably going to flatten a bit, you know, when people are sitting on these, leaning up against them, having their holiday nog. You want it to be like a substantial pillow, right? Not something that's just going to kind of squish down. And when I first designed this, actually, I thought it would be really cute to put a cute little amigurumi face on these. And I still might do that for the ones at my house. But then I was like, well, maybe not everybody will want a face on their pillow. I'll just do it without and then tell people they could add that because I think it would be really cute. Like a friendly little holiday light bulb. Just saying hi from the couch. Come sit over here, bring your cookies and your nog. All right, so I'm getting to the silver part, and you just want to make sure you're really shaping this nicely from the inside, and you can also kind of do it from the outside. I know it seems silly, like how can padding your light bulb really make a difference? But it does. You really have to. I think a lot of people just don't realize when they're stuffing things, you are actually sculpting it. You do have to make sure that the stuffing's going into the right places, because what you're putting on the inside is going to show on the outside. It's just a thin layer of yarn on the outside, so it's not like a hard shell. All right, we're almost there. And then we can add the tip and finish it up. All right, that's good enough for now. You don't have to worry if you're like, I don't know if that's quite enough. You can always sneak some in at the very end, but just try to get it stuffed as best as you can before you add the tip on. So let's see, and I did want to weave in my beginning yarn tail, which might seem silly, but I don't really trust the magic loop to stay closed forever and ever. And I like to think about my toys and things as being I want them to always be very sturdy and not come apart. So it really just takes, 30 seconds or something to weave in an end. And you don't even have to trim it off. You just, you just kind of can weave it through a few stitches back and forth, and that should be enough to make sure that your loop does not come open later. All right, and then you can match this up anywhere. It does not matter. I was looking for, you can see it's just a little bit of a jog here where this is the beginning of our round. So on my other pillows, that's where I started, where my yarn tail is, to kind of fill in that space. There is going to be this little section of nothing being attached right here. And you can use your ending yarn tail right here to fill that, or to stitch that together and then weave it in, or you can just use the yarn tail here and just kind of sew the two ends together like this. You just need to kind of make sure that the two ends are attached, because remember we did a setup row, and so the very first row it's not going to be attached. It's, there's a little split there. So, and just so you know, there are the same amount of stitches in the tip of in this piece and in the piece with all the grooves in it. So you can match them up 1 to 1. You don't have to pin it on, but you could. It might help you to look at it and know if you have enough stuffing in it if you actually pin it on first before you start to sew. But I know that I'm going to stop partway around and kind of reassess and take a look at it. Sometimes it's just easier to start sewing if you just can keep an eye on things and make sure that you have enough stuffing in there. Sometimes it's just easier to sew it than to get the pins in there and have them stay. They don't always like to stay. So I'm just doing a whip stitch, and I'm going through 2 loops from each of those crocheted pieces so that it's nice and sturdy. And we had talked earlier on, somebody had asked if they could just work into the top of their chain just as normal. And the answer, of course, is yes, you can do that. And then you will only be able to put your needle through 2 loops of this, and then you'll just have that 1 loop from the bottom of your chain right here, which is fine. It'll still be sturdy enough. And if you feel like for some reason it isn't very sturdy, you can always go around twice. All right, so as I am finishing up here, I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it now, because I'm going to be finishing up very shortly so that I get a chance to answer your questions. If you have any other questions about amigurumi, or if you have questions about, or if you have comments or suggestions for future projects, definitely let me know. I always like to know what people are excited to make. Okay, looks like I might need to add just a tiny bit more filling, but I'm going to just check. It looks like it's maybe a little bit low on filling near the tip here, but it feels pretty firm here, and it's stretching out my stitches a little bit up here. So I'm going to try and even that out by pulling some of my fiberfill back. Yeah, I think maybe I have the right amount of stitches. It just, filling, sorry. It just needed to be distributed a little bit differently. So that's one thing, you want to stand back and look at your work. It can be kind of hard, especially when you're getting to the very end of something like this. You just are excited to put it on a couple of ends and then it is done. Yay! And so normally this is the end is where I talk about blocking, and I actually did not block these pieces. You could block them if you feel like you need to even them out. I would wait until you have already stuffed it though, and then give it a little bit of a light steaming. You could try wet blocking it when you have your piece before you stuff it, or you could even steam block it too, but I think until you get something on the inside, you're not really gonna maybe see where you need to block it the most. And chances are it's probably gonna be fine. Once you put that fiber fill in, it's gonna fill things out, and you really more than the blocking, it's more important that you kind of shape things with your hands as you're kind of sculpting that fiber fill when you're putting it on the inside. So that's a little bit more important. So let's see. I think that's it. I've answered all the questions that I can see. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining me. This is a very fun project. I hope that you guys work on these and have a really great holiday crafting season from now until the holidays. Bye. Thank you so much.